So today is the beginning of a series of talks all about thriving as an empath. And there'll be 9 talks in total because I believe this is a really important topic. You know, all humans are empaths. We all naturally connect through our emotional bodies. But some people are kind of ahead of the game, you know, for whatever reason, we're sort of wired in a certain way that we can really feel others' emotions. And in a world that is accustomed to disconnect and accustomed to hiding our truth, emotional communication is really scary because I may not want you to know the truth. I may not want to communicate this way with you. I might want to tell you a story or whatever. And so for millennia, we've lived in a world that's sort of based in disconnection and truly a lack of real love. And I mean love in the definition of human connection. My teacher, Jim, he always defined love simply as connection. And as humans, this is how we connect. Whatever that true connection is, not just, oh, I'm beside each other, but I'm actually connected, right? We're actually connected to each other. This is love, right? We often only consider, say, romantic love, or we only consider the love of a mother and child or a father, you know, that kind of thing. But that's not what love is. Love is simply connecting, right? It's simply this beautiful connection that humans do. So the title of today's talk is Where There Is Love, You Are Not Too Sensitive. Because this is a huge topic for empaths, that we're forever being told that, well, you're just too sensitive and you should just shut it down or whatever. Or we just choose to not go out. We choose to not be around people. We choose to not go into groups. We choose not to go to the family events because we're just told we're too sensitive. And the reality is, if there was love in the room, as human beings are designed to love, we wouldn't be too sensitive. We would simply be sensitive. And this is really an important piece, to really think about what it means to be sensitive, right? If I touch something that's hot, I want to be able to sense that it's hot. That's a good thing, right? So for example, my stepsister, she, from the time she was young, couldn't feel pain at all. And she was an athlete. So she would perpetually hurt herself because she would go so hard, like to the point, like it's kind of, I won't even say it, but to the point that like bones would like pop right through her skin. Like she would hurt herself because she couldn't feel the pain that was telling her, this is damaging your tissues. This is damaging the muscles. This is damaging your tendons. Stop. So the sensitivity to touch and to pain is really important for us to keep our bodies safe, right? Our sensitivity to taste, to smell, to sight, this is really valuable, right? You're never going to say, well, I'm too sensitive in my eyes. Like, I mean, I guess some people are highly sensitive to light and things like that, but you want to be sensitive. You want to actually be able to see well. You want to be able to smell well. And so it's an interesting thing when we're emotionally sensitive. We want to be able to feel others' emotions. This is a natural human characteristic. But because of where we've lived, and it's not just a case of sort of looking at our parents or even our grandparents, but continuing back, we've come out of very difficult times where being sensitive emotionally was almost a handicap, right? If you imagine our most intimate connection, say beyond, parents or family, when we choose to partner with someone, today people have a lot more choice. It's even a choice to partner. But historically, that wasn't really it. For example, because women had no rights and couldn't work and whatever, you had to partner just to get out of your dad's house because your dad was the head of the household, and then you have to find a new obviously heavily heteronormative because we're talking about history. But, we had to, just find a new male leader for us or whatever. So we married. And inside that marriage, on occasion, we lucked out and there was love. And it was okay to be sensitive. And it was even enjoyed because it was like, wow, I really love that we're so connected this way. But that wasn't really the norm. A lot of people came out of a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty. And we bring that pain and that difficulty and that separation into this very intimate relationship. So now all of a sudden we're in this very intimate relationship, and maybe we're even sexually connected. So now we're playing in our first and second chakras. We're opening ourselves in this very vulnerable way. But yet the other person, or ourselves, but let's just blame the other person for a minute. Maybe the other person is bringing in baggage from their upbringing or their past relationship or karma or multiple lifetimes or samskaras or who knows, right? But they're bringing in a distance. They're bringing in a pushback. And we're open to the guts. We are literally open in our first, second chakras, our safety, our connection with others. Well, all of a sudden, if we are attuned empaths, if we are sensitive this way, this is so painful. This is more painful than anything because it's but I can feel you. You're right there. Why can't we connect this way? Why can't we feel this love? Why can't we communicate in this way? Why are you hiding? Why don't you trust me? Why are you lying? Right? Because the hard thing about being an empath is that a person might say something because we've been trained to actually create a persona that we want to live out. And so we might say something to you that I want you to believe about me. But if you're an empath, you're feeling what they're actually experiencing. And now you've got this weird thing going on between them going, I hear what you're saying, but it's not lining up with what I feel from you. And then you start to realize that they're lying. And not in an intentional, manipulative way, but what they're saying is not lining up with their truth. And we know it. The challenge is that we're trained that we're only allowed to listen to what's said. This is sort of this court of law thing, right? But this is what is said. This is the evidence at hand. And we're like, yeah, but can't you feel that? Can't you feel that they're actually angry or upset or grieving? And it's well, that's not admissible in a court of law kind of idea, right? And so this is how we live. That just because you feel a certain way, that's irrelevant. That's not what I said. So that's the end of the discussion. And you're sitting there going, what? In a previous talk, we talked about how dogs, because I'm really intrigued by this, how dogs map their universe by scent, right? So we may make a map using our eyes because we like having strong eyesight. And so if we make a map, we kind of go, okay, here's this road, here's this, here's a tree, this, we might map it out that way. But a dog would map it out based on smells, that this is what this smells like, and their whole world is based on smell. This is like telling a dog that smell is irrelevant, that you cannot use your smelling as an accurate map, right? This is the same as being an empath. It's like, no, that's not a real thing, this is just you're just making stuff up, right? You're just being silly, right? Just being oversensitive, right? And this is sort of how we're treated. And so you're kind of like, I don't really know if I belong on this earth. We kind of get into this, truthfully, all joking aside, we get kind of depressed about it because we really feel isolated and we really feel unheard and we really feel unseen. And that's a real challenge, right? And I believe that we're shifting into a consciousness that allows the sensitivity of our emotions, right? To even learn different scripts to say, I know this is what you said, but here's what I heard, because it's a very interesting thing to actually, someone says these 3 words, and the hard thing is we've been well trained to say things in a way that doesn't get us in trouble, right? So I'm going to say something that I know you cannot use against me. But you might have only said these 5 words, but my body heard the other 5,000 words. And what's really interesting about that is in a lot of society, this is, people don't want you to hear the other 5,000 words. They want to kind of feel like they've pulled the wool over your eyes and you're kind of believing what they believe. And yet, if we go to a psychic or something, we want them to read the other 5,000 words. We're never going to say to a psychic, gee, I wish you weren't so sensitive, right? That's what we're going for. We want to get underneath it. And that's a huge difference, right? When we're around people who actually want that intuitive sense, that emotional sense, we want to actually feel the other information in the room, then you're not too sensitive, right? We're just having a conversation about what we're feeling, what's going on in our spidey senses, and we take them very, very seriously. So that's why this idea that if there is love, and again, I don't mean romantic love, I mean true human connection, the way we connect with each other, there's no such thing as being too sensitive. There's nothing difficult about being an empath then, because all of our inputs are really honored. So let's look at when this goes amok, right? Then, what happened? Why do we suffer so much as empaths? Why is it so difficult? One of the reasons comes from living in a difficult world, and I say that a lot, and it makes it sound like I'm really negative about the world. I actually really dig life and, love and fun and connection and all that. But to pretend that we've been living in a utopia for the last millennia, that's not true. Many of the people here right now lived in families growing up that were mean and cruel and abusive and neglectful, right? This is reality, right? And it doesn't mean that's our life. That doesn't mean it's our path. It just means that we have to kind of call a spade sometimes and say, yeah, my good friend, my intuitive friend Nelda that I talk about, she always says that she was raised by assassins. And so she developed a certain filtration system for all humans because that was her upbringing as a child. And that's an interesting awareness. It doesn't mean she never has to be around people, but it is an awareness to say, I do have a hypersensitivity to other people because I was raised by assassins, right? And obviously I don't mean literal assassins, I mean emotional assassins. So what happens when you are raised in a home where there's cruelty or abuse? And I mean physical, emotional, mental. It could be all kinds of things. It could be living in a home where there's alcoholism or drug abuse, where there just simply are, especially when there's alcohol involved, people can say things that children should never hear. Never once. One tiny thing spoken in anger can plant a seed inside a child, and not to be all guilt laden if that was you or whatever, but just to really understand the importance of that. So then what happens, especially if you are a sensitive being, right? And I don't mean that. This is not a negative thing. You are genuinely a sensitive being in the same way that you might be sensitive because you can see more colors of the spectrum. You know that not everybody can see the same amount of the light spectrum. Some people can only see these colors. And as you go out, lots of people have all extra rods and cones, I think, in the eyes, and they can actually see different colors, right? So they are more sensitive to the light spectrum. It's super cool, right? So now you imagine you're this child living in this home, and there is difficulty. And it could just simply be that your parents fought a lot, or that there was a overreach with the in-laws, creating, control from the outside, which then caused battles within. And now here you are, this little child who cannot escape, right? This is you. There's no other, this is the pool you're swimming in. You can't escape. Well, you can feel the room a mile away. You know that if, mom starts getting mad, go to your bedroom, get out of the way. Or if dad starts acting a certain way, get outside, or whatever, right? We become hypersensitive to everybody in the room out of sheer survival. Or of not wanting to cause trouble, or just simply wanting to get out of the fray of potential abuse or damage or trauma or whatever, right? So now all of a sudden, we are trusting that emotional barometer inside in the same way that a dog trusts its smell. It can smell it faster than anything. It's like animals, they talk about this, whether this is an urban myth or not, I don't know, but they talk about when a tsunami happens, the animals who sense it actually leave long before the tsunami happens. In many ways, this is a child empath, right? They feel it so soon, right? Now what happens? So what's happening inside that child? They are training themselves to be hyper-focused on the negative or difficult emotions of the people in the room. This is what they're learning, that it's really important to feel all these people for your own safety. And you got to run, or you've got to protect yourself if something goes awry. So now we've unconsciously created this filter. We've unconsciously trained ourselves to be incredibly focused on people around us, especially people in authority, especially people who could hurt us. And now, here we are, we find ourselves 30 or 40 years old and we're at work, right? And all of a sudden, the boss is upset and this panic rises inside of you because you can't get outside. You have to stay. You have to stay in the board meeting. You have to stay there. Well, what are you going to do? Because you still have this initial filter that has taught you, no. When people are mad, you get out. When people are upset, you run away. I can't stay here. So this is a real difficult thing for us to sort out, right? And a lot of it comes through self-love. A lot of it comes through self-empowerment, that the awareness that says, I'm not 5 years old anymore. If someone over there is angry, and this is a really big deal. I love teaching about anger. I think anger is a really important emotion to dive into and really embrace. Because most people, especially the parents maybe that we grew up with, the anger that we're afraid of isn't actually true anger. Healthy anger is simply the power that keeps our boundaries. When someone oversteps a bound and we get angry, we go, that's enough. That's not going to happen anymore. This is a very healthy anger. This is a very, it's a self-preservation mechanism that keeps people at bay who are not honoring you, right? That's it. Like an animal simply fighting off an attacker. It's not a big deal. And the anger gives us the strength to fight them off. That's not the anger that an empath is sensitive to. The anger that an empath is sensitive to are full-grown adults having temper tantrums. That's that anger. That's the anger we actually lived with our parents and our grandparents, is truly grown-ups who are just wailing on whoever's close. Well, they're not actually much different than a 2-year-old. And the hard thing with a 2-year-old's temper tantrum is they are out of control. There's no consciousness there. They're just flinging at anybody that's close. It's just a childlike behavior, right? At some point, we need to grow up. We need to actually say, now that's enough. We need to actually come into our own and say, I'm not going to just have a temper tantrum just because I'm 40 or 50 and I'm in power and I can do it. And this is a really big deal. So for example, if you're an empath and you work with people or you're around people who are doing this, they're having these ridiculous temper tantrums because it's childish. It is really childish. we need to have the awareness to kind of look at them and say, wow, aren't you being a child? And we don't have to say that. We don't even have to be condescending. But call it for what it is. You know, they're not angry because something bad is happening to them and they're protecting them. They just didn't get their way. That's it. You know, and you know, when my kids were little, my kids are strong personalities. And if lots of you guys have met them, and when they were little, they were fierce beings. And when they didn't get their way, holy mackerel, could they scream. They have lungs on them. My husband, like he'd be out in the barn, like way behind the barn, and he could hear them screaming in the house. Why were they screaming? Because they didn't get the cookie. They didn't get their way for whatever reason, right? They were just phenomenal, right? But I would just, they're just angry that they didn't get the cookie. I would always sort of do a check, make sure, okay, are they okay? Are they okay? This is okay. Okay, everything's okay. They just were thwarted. And so you just sit and you let them scream it out. You know what? That's okay. It doesn't matter. And so it's the same thing. I mean, if I meet someone in the street and they're having a temper tantrum, it's like, wow. Oh, well, scream it out. It has nothing to do with me. Right? And that's really important as an empath, that we have to kind of sort that out. We have to sort out the behaviors and what are the feelings where someone's actually communicating to you. Because that's the point of empathy, is communication. If someone is simply flailing in an angry fit, and that angry fit could be a bubbling volcano, right? They could just be like, kind of gritting their teeth and getting really quiet and they're emoting, right? They're sending out these emotional signals out of their body, hoping that you pick them up, hoping you realize how angry they are, and then you will change your behavior. Because you don't want to, and I'm going to air quote this, make them angry, right? Because if they sit and they are just quiet and they're emoting, and you say one thing, you've made them angry. It's like, you didn't make them angry. They were already angry. They were just, hiding. They just couldn't find the words. They don't have the consciousness. And again, I don't mean this to criticize the other people. They're on their own journey. For some reason, they weren't taught to control their anger. Maybe they were around people growing up that just thought it was okay to flail and try to scare the crap out of everybody with their anger, right? A powerful person in anger, that's terrifying as a child. As a full-grown adult, it's like, hey, that's enough now. And again, you don't have to say it like that. There's good ways to say things if you say anything at all. The point is, as an empath, to be clear, right? This is not something you need to take on, right? This is really, really important. So it's the same thing as sadness. What if you were raised in a home where there was a lot of sadness? And this is a big deal. Like, I remember when my mom was sick. My mom was diagnosed with cancer when I was 20. And, we were really concerned about her, obviously. And so it was almost like we opened our hearts even more. How's mom doing? Is she sad? It was almost like we feel like if I can feel her sadness, if I can feel her pain, somehow I'm alleviating it. Somehow I'm helping. I want to help. Like, this isn't like some messiah complex. This is, I want to help this woman I love, right? So again, we can become hyper-focused on the suffering of others also, because in some way we hope that by feeling it, we can help. And of course, this isn't true. We can feel it and have compassion that maybe allows us to slow down and spend more time with someone. But in the immortal words of Wayne Dyer, you can't feel badly enough for someone else to feel better. And this was a really hard lesson for my sisters and my dad and I to learn when my mom was dying, that it didn't matter how badly we felt. Mom was on her own journey. We couldn't help her. We could hang out and have fun and, do what we could, but emotionally, we had to figure out something important here. So this is also something that we can become very hyper-focused to other people's sadness. And then all of a sudden we go through life and we're in a room or we're uptown or we're wherever and we can feel people's sadness. But we have this training as a child that I have to do something. I have to help. I have to take this sadness on somehow so that I can help, or I want to help. It's not a negative thing. But how dysfunctional is that? How impossible is that? One, we aren't helping, right? It doesn't work like that. And so again, this is a really important thing. This is where, life isn't just about being empathic. It's also about using our mind and our deeper wisdom and our connection to spirit and all these things to create a philosophy of living that allows us to be an empath. It's sort of that masculine structure to that feminine feeling that allows the feminine feeling to have the context it needs to be helpful and to communicate in the ways that we want it to. So if I have a philosophy that says if someone's angry, I'm going to be upset, then I'm in trouble, right? We need to shift that philosophy. If I have a philosophy that says that if someone's upset, I need to be upset, or I need to fix them, I need to shift that philosophy. Because what if instead we had a philosophy that said, well, if other people are sad, that's their journey. Like, I can't take that away from them. I shouldn't take it away from them. That's part of their path. Right? So it's a really important thing that if, it's good to be an empath, but it's really good to do the introspective work to say, have I been trained somehow in my life to be hyper-focused on others in a way that either in order to protect myself or to help fix them? And if that's true, we need to really look at that and shift our philosophy. Because otherwise we're just going to have to walk around completely shut down all the time, especially while there are so many people in the world who have unrestrained anger, unresolved issues, sadness, grief, right? How can we possibly go out into the world and actually be a truly flowing empath to actually thrive in that empathy? Another way that it goes amok, being an empath, is that because of this lack of love in the world, and this lack of love is also inside of us, right? That a lot of us we don't have that inner connection to self, our inner connection to our soul. So we are actually living a lie. We're actually telling ourselves stories. And we're taught to do this. We're taught to kind of create personas. We're taught to create the life we want to live, build the castle, and here's what I want. It doesn't really often have a lot to do with my soul's path. It's just sort of, here's what I want you to believe. So a lot of us are walking around with this sort of fabricated persona that I want you to see me through, right? So I'll tell you, oh, well, I'm so happy and I'm this and I've got this and I'm so successful and la, 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 la. And you're an empath. So you can feel the emotions, the truth. And this is not lining up with what they're saying. This is really uncomfortable. Like, I remember learning this when my kids were little, that because one of my journeys, like when I was sick with like the breast cancer, was I wasn't expressing emotion because I didn't want to burden my children. I didn't want to burden other people with my little emotions. So a huge part of my journey was connecting with my own self, self-love, all that kind of thing, but in a really practical way, simply allowing me to feel whatever emotions were there. And what I noticed with my children was if I was repressing my emotions, they would pick at each other. It was almost like the emotions I was repressing was creating this negative force field in the house, and the kids would pick up on it, and they'd start to like push each other and steal each other's toys and just do this thing, right? But as soon as I would cry, or just be honest, or just, yeah, mommy's having a hard day today. I'm really sorry. I might just sit on the couch with a cup of tea for a bit. Or, if you need something, come. But I'm feeling really sad today. It's almost like the kids are like, oh. And then they just play. But if I walk around with that fake smile on my face while I'm actually dying inside, like kids, they don't have those filters up to kind of, all they know is, whoa, like this is such dissonance. I can't even handle it. And they just go crazy and they take it out on each other or the dog or the cat or something. And so it's a really interesting thing. So now we're an adult and we're around people that are projecting these images of themselves. And you're like, I'm not even close to what I feel from you. Like, it's so annoying, right? This is not just, it's not light. It's hard. It's hard to be around people who are projecting one thing and it's not even close to the truth. So you're like, how am I supposed to act? Like, am I supposed to go along with this conversation like this is true? Like, is that, like, I don't get it, right? So that's really uncomfortable. Like, that's a thing, So when the person you're with, for whatever reason, wants you to believe something about themselves and they want to have a conversation based in this alternate version of reality, that's hard. And so sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be a little weird. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to say, are you sure? So what'll happen is, for me, I can only tell you what happens with me is, if someone's doing that, I just sort of listen, but I don't say anything. And as you guys know, I like to talk, right? For me to not talk is, that's when something's wrong. And so I'll just sort of not respond. And they'll be like, and it's weird because when you don't respond, they pick that up too, if they're paying attention. They're like, they'll actually correct themselves inside the conversation without you even saying anything, right? So you'll just sort of sit there and go, and you don't have to go, like, you don't have to make funny faces at them, but just listen with all compassion because they're struggling too, just like us. Every single person is struggling just like us, right? So we don't have to be all condescending and stuff, but we can really genuinely listen and think. And they'll look at us and they'll realize we're not really picking up what they're putting down. And then they may just back up and go, well, I guess there are these things that are kind of bothering me. And well, I guess, yeah, there's, actually yesterday you wouldn't believe what happened. And suddenly you're having a real conversation, right? There's something about learning to not just do the small talk to keep a conversation going that actually isn't based in truth. But we have to find those scripts and we have to find that center within ourselves too, right? That we're not projecting our stuff on them and all that stuff. We have to be healthy in our own self too, right? So that's a huge deal. And there's no real solution to that one except to be aware of it. That's all. Like, we just have to be aware of it. And if we feel called to say something, then we say something. And if we don't, then we don't. Like, we don't have to get all enmeshed and stuff. Another big challenge is that not only were we often raised in difficult situations where we hyper-focused on others, is we were taught to repress our emotions, right? This is like massive lack of love for self, right? But we're taught this. We're taught to disconnect from our own emotions. So if you're angry, well, swallow it. Go to your room until you're feeling better. If you're sad, well, for God's sake, get over it. That was last week. What's wrong with you? Why are you still sad? Like, we're taught that these emotions are negative. They're not just a response to the world around us. So we have repressed them. Well, think of how hard it is to repress an emotion. Like right now, like imagine you were really upset about something right now. And to think of whatever that inner mechanism is that we use to force that emotion down, to stop crying, stop being angry, pushing it down. Think of how much power that is that we're using to try to disconnect ourselves from our truth. Like it's like splitting an atom or something. It's really hard, right? So now imagine for the early part of your life, you somehow had to learn how to repress your emotions. Think of the power inside holding that Pandora's box lid shut, right? So now all of a sudden you're out in the world, you're an empath, and everybody else is feeling emotions that you have worked very hard to repress. I'm not angry. I'll tell you, one of the number one red flags for me with anybody is if they say, I never get angry. I'm like, wow, I don't believe you. You may not get angry at the person you're angry at, but I don't believe that you don't get angry. But this repression of anger, frustration, sadness, all these things that are deemed a negative thing, unspiritual, unstoic, all these kind of things. And now you're an empath. And you're out in the world experiencing sadness, anger, frustration in other people. And you have this massive, energetic lid on it inside of you. How comfortable are you going to be around other people who are expressing these emotions? You're not. Like you're working so hard, like literally in an anti-human way to not feel these emotions yourself. And here all these people are around just vomiting all these negative emotions all over the place. And here I am working so hard to keep them down. This is infuriating, right? To think that we're spending so much energy holding them down. And all these people are just willy-nilly just getting angry and stuff, right? Very uncomfortable. So what if instead we actually stopped repressing our emotions? What if we actually allowed ourselves to be angry when we're angry? We allowed ourselves to be sad. We allowed ourselves to grieve. The interesting thing about healthy emotional reactions or responses is that they rise like a wave. We feel them completely, and then they are complete. Just because we're angry in the moment doesn't mean I'm going to be angry in 5 minutes. That's a state of anger. That's a whole other discussion and a whole other challenge. But the simple act of being angry, you can become furious. Doesn't mean you hurt anybody or yell at anybody or have a temper tantrum, but you can be furious. And if you are, you dive into it, sort it, figure out what it's all about. And if you really honor it, it will dissipate because it did its job. And if we're really sad, then we get to feel that sadness. And sadness may last longer than anger, right? But then we dive into the sadness and we kind of go, wow, I feel so horrible. Or maybe it's something like shame or guilt. Maybe you did something and you actually realized, wow, that was awful. I really shouldn't have done that. That was a horrible thing to do. And we let ourselves feel that shame and guilt, and we go all the way into it. And then we learn from it. We sort it. We make amends. We do whatever we have to do. And then we go on to, and we get back to our homeostasis. When we personally experience emotions like that, it'll be so easy to feel emotions in other people, right? So if someone's sad, you understand sadness. You process sadness. You know that sadness will end one day, right? Unless you have intellectual things that are keeping you there, right? If someone's angry, it's like, give her. Yeah, go, feel that. Right? Let's do it. You want to go hit pillows or something? Let's do it. Because we know the importance of anger, right? This is really different. So then all of a sudden as an empath, you can kind of flow with other people's emotions, and we're not going to get upset by them because we're not spending so much energy repressing them in ourselves. And we have a healthy relationship with those emotions as well. And the last thing I just want to mention is one of the most beautiful ways to allow this sensitivity is to just, it sounds so corny, but it really is about love. It really is about connection. It's really about allowing ourselves to be in connection with other people, because that's where we learn, and to allow ourselves to be in places where there is loving connection. And if we're always in places where there isn't, we're going to suffer. Sometimes we really have to listen to that animal instinct, that self-preservation mechanism that says, this is really damaging, this situation here. I'm going to go find another place to work, live, hang out, where there's love. And when there's places where there are love, and we get to actually just relax, we get to release the tension in our body and actually just feel. This is a huge deal. And it is worth seeking out. Whether it's a friend, whether it's volunteering somewhere that's loving and kind. And it's interesting, like one of my sisters volunteers at a dog rescue. And one of the things she loves so much about it is that the people who run it have these beautiful hearts. And a lot of the people who are drawn to volunteer there also have these beautiful hearts. So it's an interesting thing to kind of, if you are really sensitive, to look around and ask yourself, where do other beautiful hearts hang out? I'm going to go find them. Actively find them. Put that intention out to the universe. Because once we find them, they love your sensitivity. It's like a whole different channel of communication opens up, and you get to flow in it instead of feeling, like you're caged, or you have to hide, or that there's something wrong with you. So, and also to really find that self-love inside, to really go inside and say, wow, what is my relationship with these emotions that I struggle with? And that's a really big thing to even think about, is if you find it difficult to be out in the world because of this sensitivity, to really ask yourself, what is the emotion I'm most uncomfortable with? Is it anger, frustration? Like, what is it? What is it? And then once you kind of identify even one emotion, to kind of come home and journal about that and ponder it and chat with trusted friends about it and say, I wonder why this is so uncomfortable. Why is anger uncomfortable for me to be around? And then that's a rabbit hole, right? That's a journey. That's a personal place to go to start to unravel this. Because the key about thriving as an empath is to stand in our strength. Being an empath, being sensitive is a strength. It's an amazing gift. But we have to create the structure inside to actually allow that strength to live there. Because in the world that we've been raised in, it's not a strength at all. Like we said earlier, it's a handicap, because we just get hurt because we didn't have power, and we didn't have the autonomy to leave or to make different choices. But it's 2022 now. We have a lot of choice, and the consciousness has shifted, right? Our own consciousness has shifted. We're able to actually see things from a more objective, a more witness space, which allows us to heal, which allows us to refit our philosophies, into something that is really healthy for us. I'm going to put my glasses on, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. How do we not get pulled into emotional manipulation? It's really interesting. It's like watching for signs. It's like going to school. And so if you find there are people who are masters at emotional manipulation, like if you're dealing with people who are over the age of 30 or 20, which most of the time that's our situation, if they're 50, 60, 40, 30, they've got decades under their belt of how to get what they want. And it started as children, right? Whether it was a tantrum, whether it was whatever. And so we really actually have to study it. Like we actually have to have a very conscious awareness of what's going on. It's like when I teach Tantra, I always think of Tantra as the goal of Tantra is to live like Zorba the Buddha, right? Zorba the Greek, who just lived for wine, women, and song, right? Just like juicing all of life for what it's got. But the role of Tantra is to live this exceptionally juicy life with the presence of the Buddha, with the mindfulness of our consciousness. And it's the same thing if we're around people who are emotionally manipulative. Okay, here's what's going on. And I bring this consciousness to the situation and I start to watch. And I watch when I say something, and if they realize they've kind of lost the battle, they'll change the topic to make it about them again. Or they'll try to guilt you into something, or they'll use anger, or they'll use a silent treatment, or they'll use whatever. And you observe this and you learn, right? And we say, aha, I see that. And once you can see it, it doesn't work anymore, right? I mean, in fact, once you see it and you stop responding in the way they expect you to, their behavior will amp up to the point that they will see it because it just won't work anymore. I just feel like everything we do has to do with our story and some kind of ownership of something that can't be owned. I guess, how can I ever know the real me with any form of the mind created self? Even conscience is understood with an unreliable me. This is why meditation is so powerful. There's a lot of reasons to meditate. Sometimes we meditate for healing. Like we can do various pranayamas and things that help to heal our nervous system so that we're not so easily reacting to everything. Sometimes we do pranayama or meditation to train the mind to be still. So these are sort of those beginning stages of meditation, which are really important. It's kind of like you don't run a marathon without training. So we can use meditation and pranayama to help actually retrain the brain to not be in fight or flight. But once we're there, we start to have experiences. We start to have an awareness of a self inside of us that has nothing to do with all these people. It has nothing to do even with our definition of self. It has nothing to do with having meaning in life. There's just this deep awareness, this silence inside that, strangely enough, even though there's no words for it, feels like home. Like it really feels like our true self. And this is one of the beautiful things about meditation. Whatever meditation is for you, it could be silent meditation. But again, in order to do silent meditation, you may have to do a lot of the meditations that help us heal our nervous system to be able to even sit still that long, right? Or maybe you need to sit by the ocean, or you need to walk in nature, or whatever it is that helps you feel that quiet inside that has no words. And that is an amazing touch point in all of these confusing situations. That no matter what kind of manipulation is happening out there, we touch in to this truth inside of us. And then all of a sudden, all the manipulations look very silly. And you can't explain it. You just allow people to do what they're doing, but you're not gonna jump in their bus, But ultimately, isn't every part of the self a creation of our conditioning and experiences? I don't know. See, that's all the question, right? That's the whole nature versus nurture question, right? Do we come in as a personality? Do we come in loaded with goals and dreams and hopes and fears and challenges? Do we come in with that? Or is it all developed by the world? This is an ongoing question. This isn't no one knows this answer, right? Maybe it's a combination of both. I feel like I have a intrinsic nature, that somehow this unique DNA signature seems to have a pretty unique perspective on the world, regardless of my conditioning and my experiences. And my experiences have also taught me how to live in the world, right? And they've taught me a lot about myself. So it's a great question. It's a great meditation to allow to kind of hold in the balance, which is it? To almost not find an answer, just allow it to live, allow the question to live. Dun, 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 dun. I have a friend who's a professional victim, poor me syndrome. If she has a genuine need, I'll help, but that'll be it. Totally. We've talked a lot in past talks about something called the victim triangle. And the victim triangle is where it's a philosophy that we live by, and we're taught it. Like, we're taught it in movies, TV, mostly movies and TV, and there's this idea that everyone in my life is one of three things. I'm either the victim of someone harming me, so there's a victim, a perpetrator, and a savior. And if we live in a victim triangle, we will see the whole world like that. We will see every situation like that. And sometimes we love the victim role, like that is where we identify the most. Sometimes we identify in the savior role, right? That I need to be surrounded by victims so that I can save them, right? It makes me feel good. And so this victim, savior, perpetrator triangle is a really dangerous one. And it's not common in all cultures, right? Like there's a great story. There's a book called Meditation Changed My Life. And it's a story of, a Trungpa, a Buddhist Lama who came to the States because he had been tortured by the Chinese when they invaded Tibet. And he was sitting there telling the story about the torture. And he was just kind of being light about it and silly. And so the people thought that maybe he had something mentally wrong with him, right? That he wasn't realizing what had happened to him. And the Lama, he was saying, it's so interesting because in the West, we have this victim idea, and they wanted me to paint myself as a victim. But he says, how am I possibly the victim here when those people who tortured me are still there having to torture people? And here I am, getting all this wonderful help. And this idea of this victim triangle didn't exist in his consciousness. And so it's really interesting when we meet up with people who are in that triangle, or where they're seeing the world through that triangle. And what's really interesting is oftentimes, if someone is sort of in that victim consciousness, as long as you play the savior, you're in their good books. But the second you say, well, are you sure that, bam, you're now a perpetrator. Now you're against them. So it's an interesting thing. Like, you'll know it a mile away because you're not allowed to say anything, because now you've popped into a new role as the abuser now. Oh, well, you're just like everybody else and no one understands me and la 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 la. And you're like, or I'm just sharing my opinion. Right? Mm-hmm. What was the reference to help alleviate the triangle? Truthfully, it's just knowing that it's there. And personally, in our own lives, like, the greatest thing we can do to alleviate the victim triangle is to make sure we're not living it, right? To make sure we're not placing ourselves as victim or savior. We never place ourselves as perpetrator, but to make sure we're not doing it ourselves. And once we kind of rise out of that paradigm, it becomes really obvious when someone else is doing it, and then you can just interact in a different way, right? So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you soon.